Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell. I'm your host Mark Duquesnoy, and in each episode I tap into the minds of comedians for the story behind the punchlines, the influences and experiences that shaped what comedy means to them, and why it is they put their heart, soul and no doubt stable mental health into bringing the funny to the populace. I'm the comedy nerd who's seen more than 1,500 comedians perform live comedy, and you can find out more about my journey in comedy fandom on my website, thecomedynerd.com. If you like to hear what comedians have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is a comedian who's written for some of the biggest shows on TV and radio, including Mock the Week and Have I Got News For You? And he's an experienced stand-up with a number of Edinburgh shows under his belt, including the show he's currently touring, The Spark. It's comedian Robin Morgan. How is the tour going?
Yeah, it's been fun. London was last night. That was really fun. A lady fainted during the show.
Oh, wow.
I think because of the heat of the room as opposed to the content of the show. But I'm taking it as a compliment. Yeah.
Drama.
Absolutely.
When you were like growing up, sort of very early on, was comedy a big influence on you back then?
Yeah, I think so. I remember every other year, me and my family used to have this massive family reunion in mid Wales when my grandmother was born. And I remember my uncle who lived in New Zealand at the time. We saw him sort of once every 3 of these trips. So he was kind of our favorite uncle because he was the most absent uncle. And but he'd come over and shower us with gifts every time he did. I remember he had this would have been late 90s. He had a laptop which had the game Doom on it, or Quake, one of those really old shoot 'em up games.
Yeah.
But he also had some Eddie Izzard stand up on there. And I think that was the first time I ever watched stand up, like a solo show thing. And that was very formative for me. But then, yeah, growing up, me and my brother watched a lot of Bottom and The Young Ones. And I remember sort of Have I Got News For You being on Friday nights, and me sort of laughing when the audience laughed, despite the fact that I didn't really understand the satirical jokes that were being made, and probably seemed like a very precocious 8-year-old laughing about New Labour.
So when was it that you decided to become a comedian yourself?
So when I was sort of a teenager, I used to have this notebook full of I suppose now it would be like an ideas notebook that I'd have, and or notes app in my phone, which is what I use now. But little ideas, what I assumed would be kind of like film scripts or sitcom scripts. And then I loved stand up. Watching it, I'd find loads of it on YouTube and things. And then when I turned 18, I got tickets to my local comedy club, which is the Glee in Cardiff. And then I saw that they were advertising for bar staff. So got a job there, and then through there met someone called Becky who was doing a bit of open mic comedy. I had no idea open mic was a thing. I just assumed it was kind of like you were a comedian and you were on telly and you were Lee Evans and that was it. But there was obviously no route through to that. You were just Lee Evans. So I think I wanted to. I always enjoyed writing funny things. Like I wrote for the student newspaper and was always quite funny in my group of friends, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I don't think I thought the outlet would be journalism. Like I in uni I did politics and history, but I had a journalism master's place, and I deferred it for a year because I thought I kind of want to be Charlie Brooker and just write funny things. And then started stand up that July, and I had to make a decision by the following June, I think. And by that point, I'd started getting paid gigs, and I was like, oh, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the thing that I was looking for.
Right.
So I think it was like a gradual creative thing where I wanted to do something creatively and within comedy, but I didn't know what the outlet was until, I found out that you could perform 5 minutes unpaid in a regional arts centre.
Well, how was that? When and where was that first gig, and how did it go?
So that was July, I think the first week in July of 2010. So I just finished uni, and it was at a place called Drones Comedy Club, which is in Chapter Arts Centre in Cardiff. So it's still running now, and it had been running, I think, about 5-6 years before I did it. So I think it's Cardiff's longest running gig.
Right.
And I was booked by the person who's still kind of involved, Clint Edwards, because we'd met at I think it was like a panel show, like a live panel show. And I'd mentioned to him, because I got booked as a guest, as a journalist, because at that point I was doing like work experience for magazine called Buzz magazine. And I kind of mentioned to Clint afterwards, I kind of I kind of want to give it a go.
Yeah.
And then he said, okay, so I'll book you in like 4 months and you do 5 minutes, which I think is a really sensible way of doing it, having a bit of time and a bit of lead in and having that thing of only do like right 5 minutes. I mean, sometimes you sort of meet people and they're like, I've got an hour. And you're like, you've not got an hour. I've barely got an hour and I've been doing it 15 years. So I did that and I didn't tell anyone I was doing it
Mm.
apart from my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife. And she surprised me by turning it. I didn't want anyone there that I knew. And she surprised me and she turned up before and we had a bottle and a half of rosé and then I did the show and luckily I think it went well. I've always spoken very fast and I think I spoke incredibly fast at that gig.
Mm.
But it went, I think, well enough that I wanted to do it again. I sometimes think that what would have happened if it had been a different environment, a different gig, and like whether I would have continued.
Yeah.
But it went well enough to do a second and a third, and I don't know how many gigs I am away, how many bad gigs in a row I am away from just going, no, that's it, you've lost it.
Did you then, and do you now get nervous about live performance?
Yeah, I think I still do. Definitely I did then. I
Mm.
can sort of like feel my heart rate increase and stuff. And I think for now it's whether it's something new or something big. So
Yeah.
I host every Thursday at the Glee Club in Cardiff where I used to work now, and that's a regular thing.
Hmm.
And I feel that's the place that I feel most at ease on stage. But any gig that I feel like has a bit more riding on it. Like the first time I did a telly thing
Yeah.
or, a radio record, anything that I feel like has a chance of if it goes wrong, that I won't get asked back. I suppose and also on the tour, like last night in London, I did feel nervous going up to it, but I think because I knew a couple of people, like some friends were coming along
Hmm.
who hadn't seen me. But also at this point, I'm still kind of slowly getting my mind around to the fact that it's my name on the ticket, and it's I did club stuff for so long, and I still do like mixed bill stuff in clubs where there's less pressure on you, I suppose, as a performer because there's three others. It's not your name on the ticket.
Mm.
Whereas I feel like the people who've come have made plans and traveled and got babysitters or traveled to a different town or city.
Yeah.
I feel like there's pressure, and you've got to. I want them to have a nice time.
Yeah.
So I do feel a bit of the weight of expectation, but I just try and shake that off before I go on and make it as. I think if I'm having fun, I think it's quite an infectious thing, right? So I just try and have as much fun as possible.
Yeah. Well, on the subject of expectations, did you have expectations when you were going into comedy? Did anything surprise you about what it meant to be a comedian?
Um, That's a good question. No, definitely didn't have any expectations. I didn't ever think it would be. I didn't go into it thinking this is going to be a job. I didn't go into it thinking I want my name in lights or I want to do this. I think I was very naive,
Mm.
really, only until about a couple of years ago. I think I was naive about the world and about the industry. I didn't know the Edinburgh Fringe existed until about sort of 4 years into me doing comedy, and I feel like yeah, I think starting outside of London probably helped that. But I didn't grow up, I grew up in a very, my family are very supportive and, quite creative, but we
Mm.
weren't kind of like within that world. So I think I didn't kind of have any idea or expectation of what it could be. I think I was just doing it as a really fun hobby for a while, and then started the writing side of it was when I started writing for radio
Mm.
and started to get paid stuff through that. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this can be this collaborative thing, and there's thousands of pounds in this production,
Mm.
and I think it became a bit more serious then. And then in 2014, I was getting enough paid stuff that basically I was an incredibly bad bar manager at the Glee because I was never there. Um, and lots of people, and my boss was very supportive, and the people who I hired were just my friends who just sort of like helped me. Occasionally, I remember there was a gig called there was a coffee shop down the bay in Cardiff Bay called The Deck, and they used to have a gig on a Friday night that my friend Leroy ran, and I knew that. So at the Cardiff Glee, when the show starts, the bar's closed. So
Yeah.
we would like quickly like tidy up and like restock the fridges and stuff. And because of the timings of the show, when the Glee show started, the first act was on at the Deck, which was a 5-minute walk away. So occasionally I used to double up with my bar job where I'd serve people at the bar, run and do a 10-minute set and be back in time for when the opener was off. Just because I just loved it. I just absolutely, and I still do. I love it so much, but I don't think there was any expectation going into it. I think that this industry is quite difficult for not comparing yourself to others and thinking it's only been the last few years I've been trying to think of maybe a bit more of a longer term plan, and that's less I think from an ego thing and more like I'm the breadwinner in my family, paying the mortgage, kids, etc. Like I
Right.
feel like now I need to think, okay, so how can I make this the best for my family? And I think at the moment it's, I'm traveling a lot, driving a lot.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have a bit of a set plan where something scripted comes out, or there's, like I think a longer term thinking, I think is where I'm trying to be now. But no, like I think a lot of people at the start met, people had 5-year plans and stuff, and that felt very businessy.
Mm.
And this was always, it certainly started out. This was to not get a proper job. This is to avoid adult life and be in Arrested Development for a long time. And
Mm.
I think it's only really been in the last, arguably, year and a half that I've started to go, oh, okay, maybe we should treat this more sensibly now.
Right. In terms of those like having objectives you mentioned there just briefly, do you have other things like, I want to appear on a particular stage or I want to do a particular build? Do you have those kinds of targets?
I've been lucky to be doing some tour support over the last like couple of years in sort of quite big rooms, kind of
Yeah.
like 1,000 seaters and 1,500 seaters, and I really, really, I mean, sounds obviously stupid to say, I really enjoy performing at beautiful theaters in front of 1,500 people, but I think that I haven't done a crazy amount of telly. I think that there's obviously a debate of whether telly is the end goal. Like landmark shows like Apollo or Have a Good News, those kind of shows, I think it would be lovely to do.
Mm.
Mock the Week was a huge deal for me when I did that because it was a show that I watched as a teenager. I feel like I did a good job on it, and that was really lovely. And I written for so many people on that show anyway, so that
Mm.
felt really nice. Similarly to News Quiz, it's always like a pleasure to do that. So I'd love to do, an Apollo, a Have a Got News. I feel like I want to show off to as many people as possible. So it's less about yeah, a certain stage or anything. It's more, I suppose, about longevity and just wanting to continue doing this. And I think that this tour is the most dates, and I'm doing some bigger rooms. And I think if I can continue, when I started, I think I always thought I want to do the nice clubs tour,
Mm.
write, and maybe a bit of acting. And I've kind of ticked off most of those now. So I suppose your goals have to adapt,
Mm.
or you just continue doing those goals.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think in the last couple of years, in terms of work-life balance, with the young family and things, I'd quite like to write more and be home a little bit more.
Mm.
So I'm kind of working on lots of scripted things and trying to sort of get that stuff away.
Yeah.
But I think it's a weird time industry-wise where everyone's kind of adapting to new media and trying to work out where everything lies. So
Yeah.
at the moment, I feel like if this is my career forever, then great, incredibly lucky, incredibly fortunate. I love it.
Yeah.
But I've got hopes and aspirations that there's a few other things in the fire.
Yeah. You've brought up writing quite a bit, and obviously with the interest in journalism. Do you see yourself as a writer who performs as opposed to a performer who has to write their material?
Um, I don't know really. I'd say someone asked me that on the weekend, like, what's the percentage of what I do? And I think it always sort of shifts.
Hmm.
I don't know, because I know some people like really define themselves as I'm a writer performer. I'm this multi hyphenate type thing. I don't
Sure.
know. I think I'm just a greedy boy who wants to do everything. No, I think writing for radio and writing for other people, I think made me an immeasurably better writer for myself.
Right.
And I'm very industrious when I write for other people. I feel like I write a lot, and I really work hard when I'm writing for other people, and I've always tried to get that same level of work ethic for my own stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like if I sat down and wrote as hard as I do for somebody who's doing a show for my own stand up, then who knows where I'd be. But I think it's harder, and I think a lot of people find it harder. Obviously it needs to be personal, it needs to be,
Mm.
and also when I'm writing for other people, I will just throw loads of stuff out there and they can decide what they like, whereas obviously that's another job for me to do, to work out what I want to say, and it's
Yeah.
my responsibility to say it. Um, but no, I think I suppose if I was, I'd say I'm a performer who writes, but sometimes I suppose the writing credits I've had are way more substantial than my performing credits. So maybe it's the other way around. But I think I've always said if I'm writing loads, all I'm thinking about is, oh, I just want to get on stage and try some new material. But
Mm.
if I'm on the road lots, last night I pulled over at a services because I thought of a scene in a sitcom that I wanted to write. So I pulled over at Membry Services at 11:30 and opened my laptop and quickly wrote like some dialogue down. So I think that's probably a good example of the fact that I want to do everything.
Yeah. Well, talking about writing for other people, I mean, that's an interesting thing that comes up because you might write jokes for yourself that actually you would never say. And the other side of that, of course, is that you might write jokes for other people and then go, oh, I'm going to nick that and keep that for myself. Or I wish I could say that joke. I mean, how do you differentiate between writing material for yourself as opposed to when you're writing for other people and having to put yourself in their mindset, what they would say?
I think when it's for other people, and I've definitely been in that situation where I'm writing something in, I think, oh, this would be something I'm saying. This could be, something I could do in stand up.
Yeah.
But I think at that point, it's a job, and I think I try and separate that idea that this person is, or the production company is paying me to write jokes for this person.
Mm.
So again, get the ego out of it and
Mm.
just deliver the things for the job. Sometimes I think obviously there's lots of crossover in terms of topics. I write for people who might be in a similar place for me as a young parent or family or that kind of thing. And these
Yeah.
topics are so broad that I suppose there's bound to be crossover. I don't. I've always been quite decent at parroting, getting people's voices quite quickly.
Right.
I did this job at Radio 4 for a year. They have these, they hire two people every year within radio comedy to write on all their shows. And it's like a boot camp. It's amazing. They sort of on the Monday you'll do, okay, you're doing sketches for Newsjack when that was the thing, and then Tuesday you'd read this Rich Hall script and can you punch that up, and then oh, Mae Martin's got this thing, can you write this? So you were constantly sort of just going, oh, now Miles Jupp, okay, great. Now Hugh Dennis, Steve Punt. So it's constantly just trying to mimic people.
Mm.
So I think I've got quite good at just getting the tone. There's definitely been people that I've written for and I just haven't got it. I'd like to think that with a few more bits of time, I would have been able to.
Yeah.
But no, I think I'd separate it out into like a job by job basis. And
Yeah.
again, I suppose not wanting to, when people come and see me on tour, I want them to have a nice time. If people are paying me to write jokes for them, I want them to be happy. I think,
Yeah.
it's professionalism, I think is what they call it.
Well, by a similar token, then, if you write a joke that you really like, but it doesn't necessarily land, do you keep it in just for your own amusement?
Um, yes and no. There's a couple in the show that in this specific show that aren't like 100% like bankers, but enough people like it in the show, and it's a stupid reference that a couple of people will get and I feel like they're little treats for certain people, and I'd like to think that across the show there's a few of those for everybody, and eventually
Yeah.
everyone's got their own little personal favorite reference. And I only realized it last night because a couple of people said, oh, I love this joke, and I was like, oh, that's one of my favorite ones as well. I feel like over my shows I've always done that. I've got sort of broader observational things or like proper like banker gags, and then just a silly reference that will be specific to somebody's childhood just like mine. And I quite like peppering it through that. I think it's because it's so bizarre. I reference what's a really stupid reference in this show? I think I reference Kenzie from the Blazing Squad, that sort of rap group from like the early 2000s. And again, no one who cares about them. But somebody it will go, "Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
the Blazing Squad." And yeah, but certain jokes, if it doesn't work, like if it genuinely doesn't work, then it comes out of the show.
Yeah.
But I've got like notebooks and notebooks of the first time I ever write a show, I'll write it to the point where I take it on tour. It's the same notebook.
Hmm.
So I'll have all these after the show's finished. When I'm writing a new show, I'll sometimes go back over the old notebooks and go, right, what didn't make it in?
Hmm.
And sometimes I'm a better comic after the next one, or thematically it still makes sense, but I can put it in a different place.
Right.
So I feel like if I've thought it was funny enough to go into a show. It's got something. I'd like to think that I haven't articulated it well enough, or it's just a placing issue of where it is in the show, or it just doesn't make sense thematically.
Mm,
But I feel like I feel like I'm a good enough writer and judge of what's funny now
mm.
that in theory it's good. I just haven't portrayed it in the right way yet.
Right. It's interesting, and this comes up quite a lot. I like to watch works in progress,
Yeah,
often more than complete shows, because
100%.
you get those moments where a joke might be sort of its embryonic stage, and it might work, it might not work, and it might never be heard again. It might be cut completely, but you get those extra reference points, those little niche jokes that work for you. You get the secret private jokes that only you get, and that's come up a few times. And I think in one of your previous shows, in What a Man, you did like a Delia Smith reference, sort of thing.
Yeah,
To like,
yeah, yeah.
you sort of look around the room going, "Well, I
Yeah.
get that," you know. Like,
Totally. I think that's a perfect example of just a little Easter egg, a treat for
yes,
somebody.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I used to find that so funny. But then yeah, I really enjoyed it when no like when well, one person enjoyed it and the
Mm,
rest of the room was baffled. That was
yeah.
quite but I think if it was consistently one person, it
Right.
would go. But I think yeah, I don't know what the benchmark is percentage wise of what people need to enjoy it. But I think the shame kicks in when it's too low. So at that point it goes.
As someone who's been, like you say, 15 years doing comedy, do you still see comedy in the same way? Do you still watch comedy? Are you entertained by it, or are you too analytical now? Has it become sort of jaded almost?
I don't know. I don't think I watch enough at the moment. Sometimes I chat to comics and they're like, "Oh, have you seen this person's special?" And I don't have my time is quite finite.
Mm.
And I found out last year that you can watch Netflix specials with but hide the screen and just listen to the audio. So I do that when I'm driving sometimes.
Mm.
I'm very careful to say that I'm not watching Netflix when I'm driving. That's basically what I've said there. So I listen to a lot of Netflix specials, but then when I sort of so I released my first one on YouTube last year or this year, some point in the past 12 months. I think it was this year. But when we were having conversations about how to film it, I felt a little bit ignorant because I'd been listening to so much comedy,
Right.
whereas as opposed to watching it. So thematically I didn't know where like what how I wanted it to look.
Mm.
But I still absolutely love comedy. I will still love watching seeing someone new like that. We on the Thursdays at Cardiff Glee we have like 10 spots and 15 spots, and I
Yeah.
adore watching new people. I love watching someone new crush it in a room that they haven't played before, like, and it's a big deal for them. I absolutely love that. I love people who are going through the same journey that I went through, and people who are working hard, and I love that. um and I've got sort of favorite comedians, and whatever they do I'll listen to what they're listen to what they do or watch what they do.
Mm.
I think I am probably more analytical. I think it's probably impossible not to be. And a bit of it is like, oh, I wish I kind of wrote that. Or I've got a similar joke to that. Or that's interesting. They go down that route.
Yeah.
Um, but no, I still love it. And I think I've kind of worked out what I want for me as an act. I think I was going, in terms of finding your voice and things. I feel like I kind of know who I am on stage now, which is nice.
Mm.
But yeah, I think yeah, I suppose the answer to your question is I still absolutely love it. I probably watch less of it than I probably did maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
But I think that's also just a sheer amount of time in the day, and how do you do that,
Yeah.
I have stopped listening to, well, no, that's not true. I've stopped listening to a lot of comedy podcasts, but I still listen to a key ones. But I used to when 2014, when I sort of went full time and I was just moved to London and I was driving all over the country.
Mm.
I used to listen to everything in my life was comedy then. I listened to every comedy podcast, everything. Whereas I took a bit of a step back from it a little while ago.
Mm.
I think after COVID, because I think when my whole diary disappeared during COVID, I don't think I realized how much I defined myself as a comedian. And that was quite hard when you couldn't say, oh, I've got this fun job. Like, no, you
Mm.
don't anymore.
Mm.
So I think that was quite a weird thing for me to realize. I think I've taken a little step back since then to try and work out, okay, so if you can't make your entire life comedy, there has to be other things around defining yourself by what you do.
Right.
So family, friends, hobbies, I try and read more, listen to audiobooks more, like try and have culture outside of comedy, because like I used to love going to see live music, and then my
Mm.
evenings got replaced exclusively with comedy,
Yeah.
going to see it and then performing.
Mm.
So I've started to see bands again, which is nice. And I think, yeah, taking a step back from it, I think has been quite healthy for me.
Yeah. When you listen, do you laugh or do you nod and go, that's clever, that sort of thing?
No, I no, it's probably. I mean, if something makes me laugh, then great, perfect, and things still do. But yeah, no, I definitely am that. What is it? I think it's Bo Burnham's Make Happy show. He's got like a song at the end after the show finishes where he talks about you're probably watching it on your phone. I hope you might have laughed or you might have just blown out of your nose, kind of like that kind of thing. And that's obviously so knowing about how we consume it, because it is a social thing, isn't it? But like
Mm.
I find it hard to justify going paying to see comedy when it's 4 or 5 nights a week. I also, having worked behind the bar at the Glee for 6 years, watching free comedy.
Yeah.
When I do pay for comedy, I resent it a huge amount.
You said there about calling yourself a comedian. Was there a point where, having started to do comedy, you sort of realized, oh, well, I'm a comedian now? What point on the box on the form says occupation do you put comedian?
Uh, yeah, that's interesting. I think I always used to say I do comedy
Right.
rather than saying I'm a comedian. I think when certain people ask what I do, I say, oh, I do a bit of stand up and I write for TV. Like whereas like I'm a stand up comedian feels very I don't know. It feels very bold. Whereas if you say like you do lots of different things, it feels like, oh, you don't, you're not the. I think people have a perception of what a stand-up comedian is.
Mm.
Um, and you're always on, and you're this kind of person who's just like bang, 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 bang. And obviously there are some people like that, but
Yeah.
I find those people exhausting. And I think it's, yeah, I suppose I do a lot of things. So to say I'm a comedian, I think doesn't limit it, but I feel like as a percentage of my work, it's 50-50 with writing and a bit
Yeah.
of warm up and a bit of like corporate stuff and a bit of like occasionally acting and some radio presenting. And
Mm.
so, yeah, I mean, what's on my sort of social bios? I think it's like comedian, writer. So I think, yeah, I think comedian and writer, I suppose, is how I'd kind of describe myself.
Mm.
For uh what's it called? For driving insurance purposes, I'm a writer. I'm a writer who travels to research my writing.
Do you have a comfort zone when you're like performing a solo show or emceeing a night or writing a show or being a turn on the bill? Do you have a place where you find it your happiest?
Like a physical location,
No,
or
just
one of those jobs.
well, because the solo show, it's a longer form work. You've got more time to flex your muscle, if you like, and it's all about you. If you're emceeing, you're in control of the night. If you're
Mm,
a turn on the bill, you're just one among many.
yeah,
Writing is about ideas. You've got again more freedom because it's all about coming up with things.
yeah.
Um, do you have like a place where you sort of think this is my happy place, doing one of these things?
Weirdly, I think it's a combination of all of those, which is doing a work in progress.
Right.
I feel like at that point, because I'm writing and I'm adapting things,
Mm.
I'm in control of the room. Because when I do whips, I have a notebook on stage and I will be crossing stuff off. I rank it out. I rank most jokes out of 10,
Yep.
and it's something that I need, like around June or July if I'm doing the Edinburgh season.
Hmm.
I have to stop myself doing the nope, not that one, because that gets a
Yeah.
laugh and it's highlighting, it's saving my ego, but it's not fixing the joke.
Mm.
And Jess Foster-Q directed my second solo show, and she was like, "You need to stop doing that at this point. It's useful at the start, but you need to stop doing it. If the joke's not good enough, fix the joke. Don't get a laugh off how bad the joke is, because you're not going to be doing that in the show." Whereas, yeah. So I suppose mixed bills, I enjoy. Sometimes it's nice just to do 20 minutes and bang, 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 bang,
Mm.
bang. And but when you kill it in a room that people aren't there to see you, and you've got new fans, and you know I like to be really silly and fuck around a lot, and I think emceeing is lovely for that.
Mm.
In a completely selfish point of view, it's nice not to have to stick around until the end of the night and go home early. That's nice from a sort of from a family man point of view.
Yes.
But I'm a good MC, and I've always really enjoyed it. And I think when my friends started to see me do stand up in the early days, they were always like, "Oh, you're best with crowds. You're best when you talk to people."
Mm.
I always used to feel a little bit sad that my written stuff wasn't as good as that. So I think my goal has always tried to be make my written stuff as fun and energized as something where I can play around with the crowd or incorporate it both. And I think that's something that I used to think that, oh, an hour show needs to basically be this like serious monologue
Mm.
about trauma and stuff, and that's sort of quite typical Edinburgh thing, whereas I think that's not me, and that's fine. And
Mhm.
I think if I'm good at stuff, if I've got this, Kiri Pritchard McLean described it as like you've got this, you've got a superpower in the ability to be able to pluck things out of thin air and chat to a crowd and be charming and
Yeah.
affable. So why would you not use that? Why would you not do that in an hour show where
Mhm.
sometimes people have come to see the tour because I've had a nice gig emceeing and been really silly, whereas if they don't see me doing that, then that feels like a bit of a, well, this is a trades description act thing. I think a work in progress for me when the show's nearly there and I know there's like bankers,
Yeah.
but I can mess around loads and we're creating. And one of the best jokes I ever wrote came into my head in the What a Man show at Top Secret when I was doing a preview in the afternoon. And I said the setup and then the punchline came just in my head, and that was like one of the best jokes in the show. I love how creatively that can happen when you feel at ease.
Yeah.
The safety net's gone, and you're really in the moment, and that's I suppose what I've always tried to get from those whips.
Yeah. Oh, well, similarly, when you start doing an Edinburgh run or a tour with the show, at what point do you say it's done? How much does it change from the start of the run to the end of the run?
So this tour, and I suppose last one to a point,
Mm.
I've changed my opinion on this
Mm.
because I used to think that the show had to be ready by Edinburgh, and this is the show. And if I forgot anything, I was really annoyed. And I think that's because my first hour show was like a narrative, and I kind of had to hit
Mm.
certain beats for it all to make sense.
Right.
So if I forgot a certain bit of that, I used to be really annoyed. Whereas now, so I've done Aldershot and I've done London so far, and I've got three this week coming. London, I changed the ending a little bit
Hmm.
from Edinburgh as well. And on the way home, I thought, oh, that's a funny joke. So I'm going to add something in new for Corsham on Friday. So I am going to continually add and tweak until it becomes this. And Beth, I also forgot two jokes last night that I was furious about, but I'm the only person that knows this. So I think the answer to the question is it will change and does change.
Mm.
I think overall the key points are there, the key themes are there. I know how it opens, I know pretty much how it closes, and I know the stuff I want to talk about. But yeah, I mean, I chat to the audience quite a lot,
Yeah.
and I want people to feel like anything can happen in a gig, and we witness something unique, and that can't be replicated.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so yeah, it does change. I think I enjoy having that live feel to it. I love live comedy. That's always been
Mm.
my passion. So I think that's always what I wanted to do as well.
Yeah. So Edinburgh's come up a couple of times, and you said about not really being aware of Edinburgh until you were into comedy already. So what
Yeah.
has been your festival experience as a whole? Your impressions of the festival itself, the industry side, the social side, all of these aspects?
I love it. I did my first hour. Sorry, my first sort of full month was 2015, and I did half an hour on my own
Yeah.
in on the Free Fringe,
Hmm.
and that was advised that I did that, so then I would get quotes and some press
Yeah.
ahead of my debut the following year. And I don't think I knew how important the debut was. I remember I had a production company take me up. And I think they showed me a list of, oh, you can do the Pleasance Courtyard and it will cost this much. And I was like, no. And I think I was in a position where either I didn't realize how important the debut was and that people throw a lot of money at it.
Yeah.
Equally, I've never been somebody to spend money when I don't have it, and I feel like I've maybe I've always thought it would be selfish of me to do that. And a little bit of me sometimes wonders maybe I would have had a different time. I was very, very proud of my first show,
Mhm.
had some lovely reviews, filled the rooms. If I'd have thrown a little bit more money behind it industry wise, who knows what would have happened. But I think that's a fool's like it's a very stupid thing to try and analyze it in that way. So I love the festival. I love being able to go and see so many different shows.
Yeah.
I love performing at the same time every day in the same room. I feel like within comedy, there's so many different factors, and Edinburgh removes a lot of those factors where you've pretty much got a similar audience at the same room, same time. So the show is really exposed.
Mhm.
And I love performing long form stuff. I love being on stage for an hour
Mm.
and learning how to do that and how to pace it. My first show was like a narrative thing about how me and my wife got engaged, and it had people crying at the end, and it
Yeah.
was and I loved how I think it's Tom Parry from Pappy's had this quote of like comedy either makes you laugh and think or laugh and feel, and I've always been in the latter camp, and I love comedy that makes you feel. So I adored doing that. So 2016 I had a nice time. 2017 I was working at Radio 4 and took a year off. My son was a couple of months old, so took a year off.
Mhm.
2018 went back up with what is in hindsight my least favorite show. I don't think I put enough work into it, and still had a nice time. I was on the free and made a bit of money,
Mhm.
but I found it emotionally quite difficult. Um, that I wasn't killing it. It
Right.
was still a nice time, but I feel
Yeah.
like I didn't have PR that year, so I think I felt kind of like walking past all these big posters and everyone's faces are covered by stars,
Mhm.
and I didn't have that. And I think and that made me realize, oh, you need PR to do this. And then the following year was the What a Man show, which I think is probably the best year I've had up there. Same room as the 2018, same time. So I think I created a bit of like a hub around it, and people kind of knew I was there.
Yeah.
I've always worked really hard up there. Like I'll do 2016, my first show, I had 4 people in. Um, and at one point I saw a fly buzz around me on stage, and I said, "Five, we've got five." Which I always quite enjoyed. And then the day after that, I flyered for 6 hours, and I paid 2 flyers. And I did that basically every single day. I did about 6 or 7 hours flyering, and we filled the room every day. And I was like, okay, this is how I do it. I work
Yeah.
incredibly hard, and I do all the spots, and I MC regular gigs. So I'll probably do on average about 7 or 8 gigs a day in Edinburgh.
Mm.
But it fills the room, and I would rather work hard and have full rooms. That I think I'm such a I play off an audience energy, and I find it really hard to do quiet gigs. And that's obviously such an Edinburgh staple of like you perform to 4 people, and I just think I can't do that. I can't. I don't want to do. And even if I did end up with 4 people, if I'd flyed for 8 hours, I knew I'd done enough.
Yeah.
Like I knew that there weren't people out there who could have come to the show. So 2019, I think I found my voice in that show. I was talking about things that I wanted to talk about, and adored it. 2020 was going to go back up, obviously didn't. Then 2021 did 2 weeks on the free at the end of the month in a big room on in the Counting House Ballroom, which was too big, and I found it quite tough. Coming in halfway through the festival, it felt like trying to sort of merge onto a motorway, and you're not going at the same pace as everyone else. Didn't have PR, didn't have production, and I found like that was quite important. And then this August, I did 3 days,
Mhm.
and adored it. Fell right back in love with it.
Yeah.
The lack of bin strikes helped immeasurably, I think, as well. Um, but I think a short run for me
Mm.
now
Yeah.
is the best way to do it. I want to do a kids show. I'm writing a kids show at the moment, so I want to do that maybe in the first week next year,
Mm.
and then do maybe either a best of or a whip, or yeah, I think probably a whip ahead of the next tour, and take the family up because the
Yeah.
kids are old enough now to enjoy it. And me and my wife have always had lovely times up there. I just love it. I just think it's such a playground. I think it's a shame that it's got so expensive,
Mhm.
because it's hard to justify anyone going up and doing it. It feels like it's become a debuts festival where
Yeah.
you kind of introduce yourself to the industry. But I think equally, if you're losing 10 grand, would that be better to spend on good camera equipment and an editor and spend a year putting stuff on socials? And I feel
Mm.
like that could be, well, certainly a way that a lot of people are doing it now.
Yeah.
And socials is something that I'm trying to work on myself this year. I think for a while I sort of shied away from it, and I think follower count is now the currency of what people audiences and industry are looking at now. So it's something that
Mm.
I'm in my mid-30s now realizing. It kind of feels like starting again, like I'm an open spot within the online world. Um, but that's fine. Like I've always been happy to work hard.
Mm.
So so that's something that I'm working on at the moment, trying to up the follower count in the wild west of the internet.
Well, let's talk a little bit about shows then, because we've had a show from you about the proposal. We've
Hmm.
had a show about the honeymoon. We've had a
Hmm.
show about being a dad. So you mentioned your wife. So the latest tour is not about divorce.
No.
What is it about?
So it's basically a continuation of like what I've been up to. So I realized that like at the end of the last tour, quite a few people at the end of shows were just like, we've seen every one of your shows, and it's just like if we feel like we know you, it's really nice just to hear what you're up to. So it's basically a continuation of that. And I was chatting to my wife about it when I was starting to write this, and we've been married for now 6 years, and it's about that sort of thing of you're just kind of you're it's easy to coast. I think it's very easy to coast in a relationship and in yourself, and I feel like I'm now at the point where my metabolism has slowed down, and I think sometimes you got to take stock. So it's called the spark, and it's how to kind of ostensibly it's how to keep the spark alive in yourself and in a relationship. But I think the start of this year, I was probably like so the big change for me this year is like I've knocked booze on the head. I'm like 6 months sober.
Mhm.
So and I think it was getting to a point where it was impacting certainly my work ethic, and I think I've just been making better choices, and I think that's kind of what this show's about as well, and just trying to sort of realize that you can't live like you were in your 20s anymore. And I think
Yeah.
yeah, looking after myself, and I think as a result, being a bit of a better husband and father. I think that's kind of what the show's about.
Is this a mindful thing that it's like episodic? It's the next chapter each time your show?
um I don't go into it thinking that, but
Mm.
I'll I've booked in Leicester Comedy Festival for February,
Yeah.
and I'm doing a whip. So by that point, I'll go. This tour will probably be finished, or the extension will just be coming to an end,
Mhm.
and I'll have 60 minutes to fill, and I'll just go, what have I been up to, or what's been important to me. So I think I've always been, and it's something that I'm trying to work on a bit. I've always been quite inward looking in terms of my comedy, and I've
Mhm.
always been quite happy to talk about stuff like that. And I think that's how I see the world of like a silly thing happens, I'll write it down on my phone and talk about it.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of me that wants to try something. What I didn't like about my second show was that I think I tried to imitate the first one. Whereas in my third show, I did something different. And in my fourth one, it was just basically a straight hour of stand-up with stories, and it kind of and the themes and the callbacks all emerged, but they were bits, and it was I didn't try and think I'm going to write this narrative show. This is a show about a story. This is a show with this, and this
Mm.
is a show with a sad ending.
Mhm.
Whereas so this show again, I've just written as like a collection of bits, and I think I like that. And then the themes kind of like slowly emerge.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think maybe next time I might try and be a bit more outward looking, and do something on a topic, or do something on something that I care about and want to talk about. Um, but maybe it'll just be silly things about family life, and it feels like that's what people kind of like. And, they're broad topics, and I feel like the people that I that come and see shows seem to dig it. So
Mm.
yeah, it's a tricky one. I certainly don't go into it thinking this is the next chapter, especially because what are in terms of the next chapters, death's probably the next one. Like, so kids going to uni probably, and then death. So that's a little while off yet, I think.
It's good that you're thinking ahead.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
10-year
yeah,
plans, right? 10-year
sure.
plans.
We talked a little bit also about who you are on stage. There's the thing where comedians always say, "Oh, I try to be honest on stage. I try to be myself."
Mm.
So, how much of you on stage is you, and how much is it a character of you?
No, I think it's like 99% me. I think
Yeah.
like some people like when I started out, I think I maybe was a bit camper than I am. And I think but I've always sort of had this. I've always been slightly effeminate, and people have always thought I was gay or queer. And I think I quite in my I am on stage how I am with my group of friends.
Hmm.
Like that's exactly how I am. I'm sort of cheeky and a bit sassy and like quick
Yeah.
and a bit bitchy and a bit rude, and that's kind of how I am on stage. I think I'll happily take the piss out of myself, but I'll happily take the piss out of anybody. So yeah, I think that's the first time I've kind of thought about it like that. Yeah, I am who I am in my group of friends who I've known for 25 years. That's essentially who I am on stage.
Hmm.
And I think that's so, but and I own and we're all a bit, homoerotic in my group of friends, and so I think it is kind of that. And we were never like, we weren't the popular kids in school, but we weren't like, the bully victims to a point.
Hmm.
So I think we all kind of and so I think there's a bit of owning a lot of that kind of thing of like it's quite nice to be in control of a room and you see like proper alpha blokes or people who I went to school with now seeing me on stage, me being exactly how I was in school,
Yeah.
but in control and happy with it. I think that's kind of how it is.
Yeah. What about the people who inspire you? A number of names have come up during the course of this conversation, but are there people now, are there people, new names that you're hearing that continue to inspire you and make you want to be a better comedian even?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sort of Russell Howard was the first person I bought a ticket to see, and he was the first person who I, at the Cardiff Glee, saw he was just doing a Thursday 20 minutes and that's when I first went there to see him.
Yeah.
And then we just see lots of people from Not Mock the Week and telly and learn about it that way. Tom Wrigglesworth's open return letter to Richard Branson show,
Yeah.
the train show. That was the first time I saw an hour show that had such emotional heft.
Hmm.
And that was very, very inspiring to me. That made me realize that, oh, comedy can do this as well. This is incredible. And things like The Office and Extras and sort of early that kind of Gervais stuff, I think
Hmm.
shows what emotional pull comedy can have. And I've always been inspired by that in my sort of scripted writing. I've always wanted to have a lot of heart in shows.
Hmm.
Tom Parry's solo show as well. That was wonderful. Um, yeah, what else? People who inspire me. What else have I seen recently? I mean, I love John Mulaney. I feel like he's such an incredible. I love how he sort of was a brilliant writer and wrote for people, and then also a brilliant stand-up. I like and I love watching Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. I watch their Golden Globes monologues probably once a week. And I think I like the fact it's writers as well, people who cut their teeth writing, who also perform.
Yeah.
Because I love a crafted joke, and I've started doing lots of I've been doing a few more corporate gigs recently,
Hmm.
and I basically do them. I used to do my set, and they didn't like the sets because I've not got no profile, and it's not like seeing Joel Dommett hosting the British Kebab Awards. So, whereas when I do them, because I've got no profile, what I do is I find out exactly who's in the room and I'll basically write 15 minutes of roast jokes about companies and I'll
Yeah.
find, who this company CEO is and I'll get the projector and we'll talk about the company behind me and things like that. And sometimes I'll Photoshop certain things in, I'll change Wikipedia pages.
Yeah.
Like I'll be like a little nuisance, I'll be a little bitch. But I love and but I write I write for other people, and if I've got a brief I'll write hundreds of jokes,
Hmm.
and and so I think maybe I need to put that into my own stand up and do it like that because I can be industrious. I just need to sort of focus on it in that way. But maybe the new show, maybe I can do something. The new news show. I should stop thinking about. I've been driving to this current tour show, making notes for the ideas of my kids show that I'm going to be doing in Leicester and then at Mach next year, and then also the next tour. Now I'm just excited about the next thing. I just love creating stuff. I really love creating stuff. I think that's where it's all come from. So yeah, anyone who keeps turning stuff up. Mike Birbiglia, I really love just in terms
Hmm.
of his story shows
Yeah.
and just his work ethic and the creation is the best bit. I think that's why I love work in progresses. Like this
Hmm.
whole thing was never to see my name in lights. Like I've started to get recognized a little bit in Cardiff for doing comedy, and I've slowly got to terms with that. I found that very weird. Um, but I think it's never been an ego thing for me. This is
Hmm.
about like it's a career that if I can make a living off creating, then fucking hell, what a privilege, what a joy. So I think it's always about creating stuff.
Yeah. Well, with that in mind, then, what have so far been the best and worst experiences that you've had in comedy?
Um, I would say the best experiences doing Mock the Week was a real delight.
Hmm.
Was a real treat, and I feel like I worked hard to get it. I worked very hard in the prep for it. I'd love to have had another go at it, another crack at it before it went away. And the booker, a lovely man called Ewan, sort of said as they did their final series that like in a more normal time I would have been on it 2 or 3 times by now, and that was lovely. I mean, it doesn't pay the bills, but it's lovely that that would have happened. Um, so that was a very big deal. Um, Doing solo shows at the Glee.
Yeah.
So I filmed my tour show there last year, and it was busy, and we put on an extra date, and this one is very nearly sold out. So to sell out like my hometown club where I work, that still blows my mind that like I saw my first ever shift working behind the bar. There was a mixed bill show that Lee Evans was doing new material like in the middle,
Mm.
and you know some brilliant acts have played that room and sold it out.
Yeah.
And I remember how stressed I was on the bar and not knowing how to make a gin and tonic with like 450 people, like, and the fact that I get to do that and host their Thursdays there is, the fact that they trust me enough to do that, that's lovely.
Mm.
Worst experiences? I haven't had many. I feel like a lot of people. I went out for a drink with a friend last night, and they were saying how like some comedy sometimes can be full of pricks. I think I've never. You know what? I've never felt like I've had a massive group of friends within comedy. I've never felt like I've had a massive gang. I've got like certain people that I really trust and really get on with and collaborate with.
Yeah.
But I've never felt. I think when I started comedy, I was working at the Glee, so then the nights that I was gigging, I would come home straight after. So I never hung out after gigs. I would do the set and go.
Yeah.
And so probably my fault for not sort of having a clique. But I've always felt like do the gig and then go back and see your girlfriends who you don't see on the weekends.
Yeah.
And I think when I was in London, similarly, we'd go and do the gig, go and do 3 gigs a night, and then come home. But I would never really hang out. So I think that's something that I sometimes think about. Like I never really felt like I had a clique or I had like a group. And in Edinburgh, sometimes that's the thing where you sort of see lots of people. It feels like, oh, this is a gang show. Whereas I feel like I've always been, always been friendly and always been hung out with people. That's nice, but there's only a few people I'd say like kind of like mates, like proper mates in comedy.
Mm.
But I don't think I've had that many bad experiences in it. There's been a couple of shows that it's been sort of like stressful and you work with, to deadlines, but
Mm.
there's only I could count on a couple of fingers the people who I've kind of like had fallings out with. But in the grand scheme of things, it's work as well. You're always going to have colleagues who you're not
Yeah.
going to like every colleague. Whereas I've always just been kind of like turn up, do a good job, be nice.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's enough.
Yeah. So, with your many years of comedy and many years yet to come, what is one of the key lessons that you've learned? What informs your philosophy going forward?
Um, I think hard work is probably the key to it. I think that's what I started to get worried about this year at the start when I think I think I was getting quite sort of stressed and anxious about work in general.
Mm.
Whether I was working too much or feeling like I wasn't busy enough. And I think having a little bit too much to drink as a result of as trying to sort of relieve that stress. And I
Mhm.
think as a result of that, then I wasn't being as productive as I could have been. I could be, you know, writing more, and like I think I've just realized that the creation is the fun thing for me, and if I can, if people pay me for that, then amazing, that's great.
Mm.
So I think since then, I've worked out kind of what I want to be doing in X amount of years. So now I'm trying to put the time in and the work in to make that, or to give myself a good enough chance
Mm.
to do it. I always said yes to everything, and I've always, said yes to every opportunity coming up. And then just before COVID, I was like, oh, I can kind of be picky and choosy about what I want. Then COVID happens, and then you have to start again. Um, but I think, yeah, I'm willing to work hard, and I think and I think I sort of trust in my abilities now as a comic and a writer, and I think opportunities will come if you work hard and be professional.
Mm.
It's very, very rare. If I get a job, like a writing job, like a trial day, I'll often get the series because I'll work really hard to make sure I smash it.
Mm.
And I feel like I'd love more opportunities. Equally, if they don't happen, that's fine. But I'm just want to put myself in a position where if I get the opportunity, I know I'll do the job. And I feel like that's, some people, they started later than me or started at the same time as me and kind of shot up successful straight away. I've always been quite happy to be slow and steady, just working, working, working. But I feel like I back myself now. I feel more confident in who I am this year, and both sort of personally and professionally.
Mm.
Um, and that feels nice. I feel like I worry slightly less about what people think of me as well, which is always a big thing for me personally growing up. I think there's always an element of that, and but I think this industry has kind of turned it. I think it shone ironically a spotlight on that issue for me, because I think you are getting up on stage and you are worried what you want people to like you and you want people to laugh at you. And I'm not sure how good that was for me mentally for a while,
Mm.
and especially when I defined myself as that.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that's been quite nice to sort of take a step back and work out who I am outside of comedy, and realize at the end of the day, you can write it down just as a job and you can switch off. But
Mm.
I mean, I've got the script that I pulled over to write stuff last night. I just before we recorded, I've started writing that out, and that's very exciting.
Yeah.
It's just I feel very happy with where I am at the moment. It's really exciting.
Fantastic. How can we find out about you and where we can come and see you performing?
So you can Google Robin Morgan, and then when the 1960s American feminist actor comes up, you can Google Robin Morgan comedy, and then you can find me there. I'm nearly beating her on Google, I think. I think on my Google, I'm #1 on there, but I think that's because I search my name so much. So Robin Morgan comedy, and my website is robinjmorgan.co.uk, and my tour dates are on there, and a link to my special on YouTube is there, and there's a mailing list, and yeah, all my socials are on there, so that's the best way to do it.
And so my final question then, which is always the same, Robin, how would you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
I think comedy is such a beautiful art form which can do so many things, and it can make you cry, make you laugh, make you think, and make you feel a lot. And it can also be really silly and puerile and vile, and often within this like a 5 minute thing. And it's just it's such a brilliant art form, and its immediacy
Mm.
and is something that I adore. The fact that I started wanting to write scripts, and the development of these things takes so long. Whereas the idea that I can write some new jokes, text somebody, and be on stage a couple of hours later trying them out in front of an audience, I think
Yeah.
that's wonderfully democratic, and I think for its most part it's a meritocracy as well. And I think
Mm.
yeah, it's the best. I'm really glad I sort of stumbled into it.
Fantastic. Robin, thank you so much. It's been a joy talking with you. Thank you.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, man.